All right. So I've started the recording. Let me introduce myself. My name's Peter Smallage. I'm the New York State Extension Forester, and I'm hosting this webinar in support of the NYFOA initiative, which is Restore New York Woodlands. And you all have graciously offered up your Monday evening, the 15th here of April, to learn about some of the details of coordinating the on-the-ground specifics of a woods walk associated with Restore New York Woodlands. I'm going to be, in just a minute, I'll be turning all of the webinar over to Jerry Michael, who's agreed to be the presenter of this topic, but I want to orient you to the screen so that you can see the kinds of things that resources that are available to you and what you can expect to find. We'll start in the upper left-hand corner. You should see a tab that's called the File tab. And if you click on that File tab, you have the option to Save As, and you can select to Save As Document. And what you're doing when you do a Save As Document is you are saving the content of a particular tab. So right now you should see the Restore New York Woodlands logo as the major part of your screen, and that's associated with the tab that's labeled RNYW Webinar. So it's the name of the file that's uploaded as a PowerPoint presentation. So if you wanted to download all of that content onto your computer as either a PDF file or as a UCF, which is a Universal Communications Format file, you're able to do that from the File menu and then Save As, and save the document, and then you are prompted to save that onto your computer. So that's kind of one thing to pay attention to. You can test your sound and audio, and I'll type this in case people can't see it. Test sound. Actually, I'm going to share. Let me take control back from Jerry for just a second. So now I've made myself the presenter, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to share my event window. So you're going to see what I see on my screen here in just a second. Okay, so everything should have changed for you. Although it should look pretty much the same, what you're seeing is my screen. And if you want to test your sound, you cursor over the Communicate drop-down menu on the top panel, and then you go to the Speaker Microphone Audio Test. What's going on? Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing this now. We've already been through the chat pod, so if you have questions to ask, you have two options. You can ask the question by clicking in that box and typing your question, or we also have set everybody that we can as panelists, so that allows you all, once we've made you a panelist, to click on the red microphone icon next to your name and unmute your speaker. What I would suggest, though, is unless you have a question, leave your microphone muted, and then that way when your dog barks or somebody's running the coffee grinder, we all won't hear it. So if need be, I can help you mute your microphone if you get stuck with that. The final option, in the lower left-hand corner of the screen, you should see some options for full screen, and then a pop-up window for a percentage of display, and then a zoom in and zoom out hand lens. So you're able to adjust the size of what you see on your screen to fit your own personal preferences. So that's just a little bit of an orientation. So with that, I'm going to hand the the speaker baton, if you will, or presenter baton over to Jerry Michael. Jerry's been very, very active in the Restore New York Woodlands campaign this year, and I will turn it over to him. I'm going to mute my microphone, and Jerry, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Peter, and hello, everybody. We're glad for this final opportunity to share information and resources that will help make our Woods Walk weekend next month the big success that we hope for. As I look at the list of participants here, I think in many cases we're preaching to the choir, but I hope there'll be something here for everybody. I'd like to start by putting these Woods Walks into perspective as compared to the hundreds of successful Wood Walks our 10 chapters have conducted over the years. Most of us plugged into the webinar have planned and led plenty of interesting and educational Woods Walks with a variety of themes ranging from timber stand improvement to promoting wildlife habitat and everything in between. And we haven't needed a lot of help from NYFOA at the state level to do it. So what's different about Woods Walk weekend? Late in 2011, NYFOA began thinking about how to celebrate our 50th anniversary in 2013. And Kelly Smallage was asked to chair a committee to plan simultaneous Woods Walks around the state as a part of that celebration. At about the same time, the Cornell and Nature Conservancy studies regarding the regeneration crisis began receiving widespread attention. And last June, the NYFOA board decided to adopt the Restore New York Woodlands theme for the Woods Walks that we were planning to hold on our anniversary year. Because the subject matter for these Woods Walks was going to be specialized and new to the chapters, the Restore New York Woodlands Committee was asked to develop information and materials that the chapters could use to deliver a consistent message regarding the regeneration and other forest health issues. We're going to be reviewing some of this material tonight. Furthermore, because the board felt it was important to involve the general public in the Restore New York Woodlands initiative, the committee was asked to develop a communications and publicity plan to accompany the effort. That plan is underway. We have a very informative and user-friendly website up and running, and Jim Miner's guest editorial about our endangered woodlands has already appeared in at least 6 daily newspapers, I think more than that at this point, and we're hoping it'll appear in many more over the next week or so. I know the editorial ran in our Binghamton Press a week ago, and we've already received Woods Walk reservations from people who found us on the NYFOA website after reading the editorial. I'm going to switch to another chart here. This is the map of the locations for the Woods Walks, which people see on our website when they go to it. And there's, I think, 28 posted up here so far. I know we're working on 2 or 3 more. And people can click on the locator button and they can get detailed directions and a description of the Woods Walk that they might like to go to. Now, that's the background as to why we're spending so much time and effort to help support the chapters in this big undertaking and some of the material that we've provided to help do that. I'm going to go to another chart here. All right, we should be looking at webinar objectives. We're going to deal with the specific objectives for Woods Walk weekend in more detail on the next chart, but I'd like to reiterate that the primary theme for these Woods Walks is the Restore New York Woodlands initiative. And the focus is on forest health issues in general and the regeneration crisis and high grading in particular. We know that several of the Woods Walks chapters are planning will include other subject matter as well, and that's fine, but the primary focus should be on forest health and sustainability. On the second objective, There's a wealth of information and resources regarding forest health issues on the NYFOA website and on Cornell's Forest Connect website. But our main focus on this webinar will be on the Woods Walk Leader's Guide, which provides a suggested agenda and script for conducting the Woods Walk weekend Woods Walks. Lastly, we anticipate some tough questions and challenges from the Woods Walk participants, and particularly from the general public, who we hope will be in attendance. We'll offer some suggestions and resources that should help you prepare you to deal with some of those questions. Okay, the objectives for the overall Woods Walk weekend. The grand strategic objective is to overcome the challenges facing successful reestablishment of a third-generation forest in New York State. These objectives for Woods Walk weekend are one means to that end. First, we recognize that NYFOA represents a very small fraction of those who own woodlands in New York State, and an even tinier fraction of the population at large. We also know we cannot solve these problems by ourselves, and the involvement of others, including the general public, will be essential for our success. Secondly, in order to reinforce the seriousness of the problems and the consequences of failing to deal with them, we want to ensure that people appreciate the irreplaceable benefits that our forests provide. Third, we want to educate Woods Walk participants about the establishment of our current second growth forests, the ecological imbalance and forest health issues that characterize most woodlands today, and the narrow window of opportunity we have to address the problems. And finally, we want to secure an understanding and support for the solutions, some of which we anticipate will be controversial. Okay, under the hosting information on our website is a large document of about 15 pages we call the packet, which is put together by the committee to assist chapters in planning and carrying out Woods Walk weekend. If you go under hosting information, you find what we call the Woods Walk Leader's Guide #1. And I've got that on the screen here. The first several points on this guide are sort of Woods Walk 101. The chapter chair could welcome participants and say a few words about NYFOA, our mission, our 50th anniversary, etc., and then introduce the forest owner host. The host could review the history of the property and their objectives for it, discuss the management plan if they have one, and the stewardship actions that they've taken on the property in the recent past. If the Woods Walk will feature a tree identification contest for children, I know some of them are planning that, somebody could explain how it will work at that point. I'm going to scroll down. The participants may have to scroll down this chart themselves. I'm not sure how this worked, but I'm now down to point #1. After the preliminaries are finished, the chapter chair or host could introduce the forester or the master forest owner who will lead the Woods Walk, and it gets underway. The sequence of the presentation shown in this guide has been tested in several preliminary Woods Walks and other workshops, and it seems to facilitate the understanding of a fairly complex ecological problem, as well as its importance. We strongly recommend that you follow the sequence of the presentation and cover the material in each of the 5 segments fully. The guide we are viewing on this page is just a summary of the presentation, The 4 pages that follow this guide on the website are a supplement to the guide with a lot of additional information and detail relating to each of the points that we want to cover. Each of the segments of the presentation could be accomplished at a different stop along the course of your woods walk. The first segment, number 1 here, benefits, covers the benefits that trees and forests provide. By discussing these benefits at our first stop, we will establish the basis for a sense of urgency about the seriousness of forest health problems and the consequences we will suffer from failing to deal with them. We recommend that you try and make this part of it participative by asking folks that are participating, particularly children, if you've got children in the group, to provide their own ideas about the benefits of forests. We all know that very well, but sometimes people would be very impressed if they saw the whole list all at one time. The second segment of the presentation is a history lesson about the establishment of our second growth forest and the return of the white-tailed deer. Knowledge of this history can help people understand the regeneration issue and lead to an acceptance of the remedies that will be necessary to resolve the problem. Again, there's a lot more detail on the history of our forests in the supplements following this guide. The third and fourth segment of the presentation should take place at a location where regeneration problems can readily be observed by the woods walk participants. You should be able to point out the absence of desirable tree seedlings or seedlings that have been browsed by deer. At this or previous stops along the way, you should have been able to point out examples of interfering or invasive vegetation. If you're standing in a typical 100-year-old second growth forest, you can ask how many of the current trees are likely to be there in 50 years. And with no visible or viable regeneration on the ground, what this area would look like when the current trees are gone. What will be the impact of that on air and water quality, on wildlife, on the economy, and all the other benefits that we talked about in the previous stop? And should we care? We can wind up this stop on the woods walk by pointing out that the conditions in this stand are typical of New York forests. We should mention that the Cornell and Nature Conservancy studies found up to 70% of New York's forests lack viable regeneration. By the way, there are links to both of those studies on the website. This is the second page of the Leader's Guide. The fifth and last segment of the presentation is likely to produce the most discussion because it involves management actions that will be seen as controversial by some. These management actions include reduction of deer populations or their exclusion from regenerating woodlands, the broad use of forest herbicides to control interfering and invasive vegetation, and fairly heavy silvicultural thinning at some point during the regeneration cycle. Let's start with the deer issue. I'm looking for the right chart. Sorry for the delay here. Here we go. Deer browsing, there's no doubt that deer browsing is at the heart of our regeneration crisis. A single deer can consume 400,000 tree seedlings per year, and unfortunately few, if any of them, are going to be beech or invasive shrubs. Those seedlings that don't get killed outright can end up looking like a permanent bonsai bush, like this photo of a hard maple that will never reach the canopy. Hopefully you will already have been able to demonstrate this problem on the ground at an earlier point during your woods walk. But regardless of the facts regarding the browsing issue, we have to recognize that our relationship with the white-tailed deer is very complex. My great-grandparents in Pennsylvania never saw a deer in their 90-year lifetimes that was not in a zoo. During most of the 19th century and as late as the 1940s, there were no deer in the northeastern United States, except the Adirondacks and the extreme northern parts of the New England states. Our generation can remember how thrilled we were when the American eagle and other raptors came back from the edge of extinction after DDT was banned in 1974. Well, our parents and our grandparents were just as happy when the whitetails began returning to their former range in the early succession forests of the 1940s. Let's face it, who doesn't enjoy seeing these attractive animals in their natural environment? Walt Disney cashed in on the excitement caused by their return with the famous movie Bambi, released in 1942. And still today, a significant portion of the public resists any efforts to bring deer populations into balance with their environment. We need to understand and respect these attitudes, as well as the attitudes of those of us who enjoy hunting deer. We know that significantly reducing deer populations will be necessary for successful regeneration in many areas. And regardless of the emotions surrounding the issue, it can usually be sold to critics by demonstrating the evidence of the problem on the ground. This photo shows an expensive alternative to reducing deer populations: exclosure fencing to keep them out of the stand where regeneration is being attempted. This photo was taken 3 years after the fence was installed, and the regeneration is about 4 feet tall. I was in this area last year, and the regeneration now is about 12 feet tall, with nothing at all growing on the outside. This is another alternative to controlling the deer. You can utilize tree shelters. In this particular case, it was a former red pine plantation, and sugar maple, red oak, and black cherry seedlings were planted 12 feet apart, and natural regeneration has come in around them, mostly sweet birch and poplar. Tree shelters could also be used to protect natural regeneration of desirable species. This is an effective alternative on small acreage, but probably not practical on a large scale. The second management action we're discussing in this part of the guide is control of interfering vegetation or invasive vegetation, and the use of herbicides in that regard. This photo shows a stand where the deer consumed the entire understory of desirable tree seedlings, which was then replaced in this case by hay-scented fern. Deer will not eat the fern, and when it's established for as long as it has been in this stand, the fern can prevent the germination of tree seeds, even if you're able to manage the deer population. Hopefully, you've been able to show examples of interfering vegetation during an earlier part of your woods walk. It might be beech, it might be different kinds of grasses, it might be striped maple, or it might be any number of invasives. It's a problem regardless of what it is, and the only practical way to deal with it in large scale is with herbicides. This photo shows the application of an herbicide, in this case glyphosate, to control fern with a powered mist blower. Glyphosate is the active ingredient in Roundup and several other branded herbicides. There are many different herbicides designed for different uses in the forest, and most of them are relatively non-toxic. On large acreages, herbicides are the only effective and practical method of controlling interfering and invasive vegetation. But we expect that the public will object in many cases to this tactic. There are 2 references on the website that testify to the safety of herbicides. For instance, according to the Environmental Protection Agency, glyphosate is less toxic to animal life in equal dosage than salt or caffeine. The third management action that we want to discuss is silvicultural treatments that will be required to provide the sunlight necessary for establishing our third growth forest. Since many of our current even-age stands are nearing or in the last quarter of their life cycle, they are approaching the time when regeneration should be our highest priority. Once we have controlled or excluded deer, treated interfering vegetation, and established desirable regeneration on the ground, we will need to conduct a final harvest of marketable trees and removal of culls to bring sunlight to the regenerating third forest. In this photo, a shelterwood harvest has been conducted to provide enough light for establishing the regeneration. And the understory of beech brush has been killed with herbicide. There are a few good seed trees still standing, which should promote the natural regeneration of the stand. Again, the public understanding of the need for these actions will be necessary because, as Gary Goff is fond of saying, good forestry isn't always pretty. Before we leave this page, I'd like to say a few words about high grading, which, as we know, is the premature harvesting of saw timber before it reaches economic maturity in order to maximize short-term financial gain. In the worst cases, high grading can degrade a stand by eliminating desirable seed trees before regeneration has been accomplished. While the management actions we have just discussed may also apply to rehabilitating a high-graded stand, the most effective response to the high grading problem is prevention through education. NYFOA is drafting best management practices to address unsustainable harvesting methods, and we will continue to bring the message to all forest owners, whether NYFOA members or not. Unfortunately, if we have to address the high grading issue with the general public, we have to do it hat in hand, because as Pogo used to say, we have met the enemy and he is us. I'm looking for the right chart again. There we go. Well, we're back to the second page of the Woods Walk Leader's Guide, which covers the 5th segment of the Woods Walk. We've discussed some ideas on how to handle the deer, herbicide, and silvicultural management actions required to achieve regeneration of the forest. This would essentially wind up the Restore New York Woodlands content of the Woods Walk, and you could then move on to other venues or other subjects if you plan to do so. And I know from reading the descriptions of many of the Woods Walks on the website, a lot of you are holding your Woods Walks in very interesting venues with a lot to see in addition to the Restore New York Woodlands and issues that we're talking about here. This essentially covers the bulk of the material that we wanted to emphasize tonight. Specifically, we call it guide number 1, which is kind of an outline of a script, a sequence and a script for the material we'd like to see covered in these Woods Walks. Once again, following this guide on the website are 4 or 5 pages we call the supplement of the guide. They have a lot more information that you might want to read over and make some notes from so that you can talk to these issues and answer questions that might come up. Fumbled my mouse here. There we go. I'm going to ask Peter to help me with some of this following discussion. There were 3 or 4 additional items that we wanted to remind you about tonight. The first has to do with local publicity. The guest editorial, as I mentioned, was sent over Jim Miner's signature to all the major daily newspapers in the state. But in addition to that, we encourage each chapter or each host to do some local publicity in the penny savers and the weekly newspapers in your area. The website under information for hosting Woods Walks includes 3 sample press releases that you could use to fill in your own local information. And we've also included on the website a media list that Sarah Stackhouse put together after great effort that lists practically every newspaper that we know about in the state, large and small alike, and gives you contact information for them. In some cases, it tells you what their restrictions are as far as word count. And those 2 resources should be of help to you in getting your local publicity out. But the clock is ticking on that. Many media require 2 or 3 weeks of notice. And so to get a notice in on a Woods Walk that's going to be May 11th, the press releases should be sent out very soon.
Jerry, this is Peter. Do you want me to go ahead and show folks on the? We can activate the NYFOA webpage so that everybody can see it. Do you want me to do that?
That's a good idea.
All right, I'm gonna change me to presenter. All right. I guess while I'm doing that, does anyone have any questions for Jerry about the leader guide or the suggested process for developing a Woods Walk on either your property or the property where you're going to be assisting the host? If you do, you can, I think everybody now has microphone access. You can click the red button and that will turn on your microphone and you can just ask a question or you can type it into the chat pod at the bottom. There has to be one question. Oh, Gary.
Charles from Stackhouse. Got a quick question or comment.
Hi, Charlie.
Hello, everyone. I think probably I anticipate most resistance to the concepts of what's needed from deer hunters. You know, we have too many deer on our farm, but many people who hunt, I see letters to the editor in the hunting magazines and so forth, complain about not enough deer, not seeing enough deer, and so forth. So I would just anticipate that that would be one of the sticking points with some people, the concept that we have too many deer. That's it.
Jerry, do you want to respond to that, or?
The volume, I could not hear it loud enough.
Okay, so Charlie was saying that he anticipates pushback, particularly from people when we tell them that deer are a problem, and just, you know, wondering how to address that. I mean, and then there was also, you know, people that don't necessarily, so the hunter audience thinks that maybe there should be more deer. And then there would be other people who aren't necessarily hunters, but I'll call them nature enthusiasts, and you know, and they don't like the thought of shooting deer as a strategy. So
well, let me give the one example. And when the guest editorial ran here in Binghamton a week ago, one lady who lives in Binghamton called Jim Miner to protest our strategy to reduce the deer population. And Jim, being a good executive, delegated her to me. And I called her, and we had a 1-hour phone conversation. It actually took me longer to go through it with her than it just took me to go through it with you all. But it was a very interesting conversation. She's a lady who feeds carrots to her deer in her backyard against the law. But she seemed to be very receptive to all the information that I gave her and the evidence that I gave her about the problem, even though we were doing this on the telephone and not standing out in the middle of the woods. The reason I spent as much time on the deer issue tonight as I did with the analogy to the return of the American eagle is that we recognize the fact that this is an emotional issue. But we know, and we have to show the evidence to the people that are critical of this strategy, that it's a choice between a sustainable deer population and a sustainable forest. We need to bring it back into balance. It got so badly out of balance in the 1950s and 1960s that we got where we are today, and it's going to take aggressive action to get it back. But as an aside, at the end of this 1-hour conversation, the lady ended by saying, you know, well, I've certainly learned an awful lot today. She said, my daughter is engaged to a hunter, and I've had a big problem with that, but now I think I'm going to give him a break. So one at a time, we make some headway on this. I don't know how else to answer it. I think if you can get them in the woods and show them the browsing, or if you can stand them outside of a deer exposure fence and show them the difference between the regeneration inside and the lack of regeneration outside, you can make your point.
Jerry, I'll add to that. I think that, and there have been some other good comments that we want to address as well, specifically to Charlie's question. That's a question I think everybody is going to have to confront. The way I've usually managed that and reacted to that is to try to show people, to get them to look on the ground of the forest and see what isn't present, because it's challenging when you walk out there and you don't see the problem because the problem has been eaten, if you will, or you don't see what isn't there because it isn't there. So when you ask people to do things like, okay, let's count how many desirable seedlings are here and how many of them are unbrowsed in such a fashion that they're going to produce a stem of desirable quality, And for, even if it's just aesthetics, most people aren't going to like that bonsai-looking tree because it's going to grow it up into a wolfy tree that has poor structural integrity and is going to fall apart during ice storms. So, so I think that's one way to do it, and to get them actively looking on the ground, and particularly with hunters when they're concerned with that, then ask them, what are the deer going to eat? And you get, it'll come back at you and they say, well, the farmer down the road grows alfalfa, so what do we have to worry about? Well, so then the farmer is subsidizing deer hunting in that community as well as trying to, feed cows or whatever else. So there's some people you're not going to get shifted away from where they think the right answer is, which is more deer, but they are potentially, some of those people by having that honest discussion, you may get some of those people won over. I don't know if Gary is still on. Gary has had this conversation with a lot of people when he does his talk. Gary, I'm going to unmute your microphone. Do you want to chime in on some of this?
Sure. Can people hear me?
Yep, I can hear you.
Okay. Yeah, there's many approaches. I think a quick one that will put everybody in their place in a big hurry is, do you agree that there's such a thing as too many deer? And everybody will say, oh, I suppose that might be possible. And then you ask them, so at what point would you see evidence of too many deer, and how many deer would that be? And if you're the perspective of deer hunters, there is almost no such thing as too many deer unless they all starve to death and they all weighed 100 pounds. So that would be a definition of too many deer. But if you're a forest owner, chances are you're standing in a woodlot that says there are too many deer. And that's, the landowner has an objective to grow trees. He or she can't do it. There's too many deer. So too many of a good thing is a bad thing.
Okay, thank you, Gary. I like the process, and Gary, I think you can, and everybody can turn your microphone on and off. I believe. If you can't, let me know. I think that's a good way to pose the question: is there an occasion when or under what circumstances might there be too many deer? And then so get them to force them to answer their own question. Jim Miller says that he's going to be hosting a woods walk at a not-for-profit animal rescue property where they don't allow hunting and they're sensitive to using chemicals. I agree that's going to be a challenge to secure and encourage regeneration on this side. I guess there are two ways to approach that. One is anytime you limit your management options, which they have done, and I'm not finding fault with that because they have certain objectives that they're trying to achieve, but anytime you limit those management options, you're going to complicate the process for other types of objectives. So that doesn't mean you cannot secure regeneration. If they were bound and determined to accomplish successful regeneration on that site, they would have to find other means to reduce the impact of deer by using, making the investments such as Jerry was showing with fencing or with tree tubes, and in terms of controlling interfering vegetation, they would have to use mechanical methods, which tend to be more cost intensive and labor intensive. But if you're really bound and determined, you can make them work. I don't know if you could make it work on 150 acres, but if you had a small site and you were willing to apply yourself, you could probably do it. The other thing is to ask the question, well, I guess if it's a woods walk, then they have woods there, so at some level they're interested in it, and they need to assess how interested they are in having that forest be able to regenerate. And if they're really interested in that and they want to hold to their current objectives, then they need to use non-lethal means and mechanical vegetation control. Or they simply say, look, we consider ourselves more of a not a woodlot setting, even though there are trees here. And because of that, it's like saying in agriculture, if you have a cornfield, you're not going to regenerate sugar maple in a cornfield because you have other objectives. So they may maybe just have a unique circumstance there. That's strange. And as Tim Levitich, points out, he says, we're impressed by your courage, and hopefully you'll be able to get some people thinking about that. I'll also, and Steve Cutney has a good point, the current forest started when there were very different conditions on the ground. There was large abundances of sunlight through abandoned agricultural fields. The cutting that happened had essentially been land clearing and provided that full sunlight, so it wasn't high grading. And the deer herds in the early 1900s, as Jerry pointed out, were very small. So things have been very different. And Charlie and Sarah pointed out the wildflowers. If people aren't interested in timber, having access to wildflowers might be something that would trigger them to be more conscious of the impacts of deer. Okay. Let's see. All right, I see Jim had sent a note. I see it. I don't know if Jerry sees it. Jim Miner had started with an hour-and-a-half phone call with the individual that also talked to Jerry. So between the two of them and about 3 hours on the phone, it sounds like they maybe got her pointed in the right direction. So let me share with you my web browser, and we're going to take a look at give it a minute here. Okay, can you see the NYFOA website?
It's on, Peter.
Okay. I'll turn on the chat pod. Okay, so in the right-hand corner, right-hand panel, you see the logo, the Restore New York Woodlands logo. And I just wanted to, Jim Miner had sent a note, there are a great number of resources that are available if you go to this site. Excuse me. I'm not going to go through all of those. I guess I'll refer you back to the initial webinar, and that link is here as well. So if you haven't spent 10 or 15 minutes just snooping around the site to see the resources that are here, there are lots here. There are a lot of handouts that you can have. What we can do is we'll create a summary sheet, probably place it under hosting information, a summary sheet of a few key pieces of material that could be provided as handouts to participants. So let me say that. I think, let me just scroll back and see Jim's comment, see if I've captured that. And included, you'll want to make sure you have information on how to, information on NYFOA membership form so people can join NYFOA. And I would say it's, recognize, I think it's essential that we all recognize that NYFOA is a great value, and we need to be willing to stand up and say, NYFOA is a great value. Here's the benefits you get from it. You get the, this chapter level, you get the state level, you get interactions, you get access to educational and technical information that you otherwise wouldn't have such ready access to.
Peter, why don't you click on the second link on the first line? It says read summaries about the problem here.
Okay.
Yeah.
So this is going to open up one of the important, this is the trifold. And so this would be a good handout because it covers, so here's some information about NYFOA. It has the contact information, and on the inside cover, it details the information essentially that Jerry was using to build the content and itinerary for the woods walk. So if people only have one piece of paper to walk away with, this is probably a really good one because you see on the left-hand panel, it describes the beauty of the forest, the importance of the forests, some of the economic drivers that are associated with forests, but then some of the problems that can come about from this. So this is a good resource to have on hand. We also were talking about the media list, and I'll just say to people, if you go to the chapters, and I don't know if you can see when I put my cursor on chapters, you see a list of 3 things. Do you see those 3 things? Okay. Then if you go down to resources for chapter leaders, and I clicked on that, and then you say the first solid bullet, resources for chapter steering committees. If you go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and the 9th one down, it says media contact list. I'm not going to click on that because it downloads an Excel file, but just know it downloads an Excel file, and by chapter you can pull out a list of media contacts that Sarah Stackhouse very graciously compiled and send out press releases. If we go back to the home and then to the Restore New York Woodlands page, and then hosting, I think it's in hosting information. So there's the original, the bottom bullet there is the YouTube recording of the first webinar. This current webinar is being recorded. And then there's that first bullet, I think. Let's try it, information on hosting. Yes, this is the Restore New York Woodlands packet. Page 1. And then page 2, this is the table of contents, and you can see about halfway down that list that there are sample press releases that you can use. So this packet is a great go-to document, and it's something that all of the hosts and the site facilitators really should spend a little bit of time familiarizing with so that they can provide resources to the participants. Okay, some other things on the list. Let me, any questions on the NYFOA webpage before I jump away from this?
I'm not seeing a chat box, Peter.
Okay, so all right, so if you want to, all right, so there's a green tab at the top of the page, and if you click on that, you'll have the option, it'll show you a bunch of buttons, and you'll be able to turn on your chat pod. That's one way to stifle conversation if you take away the chat pod, isn't it? That's one of those things you're supposed to avoid as in an educational mode. Okay, so we're going to go back to the main page. I'll have Jerry and Kelly's contact information up here. Just some other pieces of information and housekeeping. On the NYFOA webpage, we showed you the trifold brochure. That would be a great handout to have available. There were hundreds of those printed up. They're all gone. I think at this point what Jerry and Kelly are suggesting is that the individual host sites and the chapters would print those and make those available to people, using chapter resources to make copies of those. Go down to Staples or Office Depot or wherever you go to a local copy shop and get copies of those made. There are going to be some Restore New York Woodlands temporary tattoos, I believe using the logo that you see in the upper right-hand corner there on the screen. Those are going to be available in a couple of weeks and will be mailed, clusters of those will be mailed to all of the host sites.
And Peter, the intention as far as using them was the prizes for kids that might be participating in a tree identification contest or some other kind of a contest that we'd be running.
Yeah, I think you could use those. That would be one way to use them. If you're fortunate enough to have kids show up, make sure every kid gets a Restore New York Woodlands tattoo. If you don't have kids show up, grandparents and parents should take tattoos home for their kids. It's really, when you think about conveying a message. The whole movement to recycle happened through children, right? Children were taught how to recycle, and then children taught their parents. So if we can get children thinking about, you think about, you go and ask any kid on the street, and they can tell you all about tropical rainforests. So, you know, if we get kids to the point where they can talk about, let's restore New York woodlands, we will have really accomplished something big. So I would say, you know, the tattoos will do no good if they sit in somebody's desk drawer. Use them however you think it's judicious. This is my own opinion. Use them however you think is judicious to get the word out. But certainly as prizes and making sure that people have some to take home to children and grandchildren. There are also T-shirts. Those T-shirts were distributed at the annual meeting in Syracuse. If there are people who didn't get T-shirts who are hosting a site, they're an attractive gray T-shirt that has the logo on it. Either call Kelly or send her an email no later than, let's say, May 1st. So let's say T-shirt orders to Kelly by May 1st. And then from that, she can determine how many she has available and how many she can distribute. If you'd like to have T-shirts available to sell, you know, contact Kelly as well, and she will distribute what she has to the host sites. And then the final item that I see is photography. I think that it's going to be a Kodak moment to have, you know, at least 28 different sites having woods walks around the state to get pictures that can be put up on the Restore New York Woodlands webpage, that can be posted on Facebook, that can be put into the NYFOA annual accomplishments report, that can be used. There should be press releases at the end of this that provide accolades to NYFOA, that go out to all the local media and that go out to all of the local elected officials. So all those pictures are going to be worth you know, 1,000 words. So,
Pete, I'll just comment on that too. So many of the pictures that we have of woods walks are taken from the perspective of the participants. So you end up looking at the backs of 20 people in order to be able to see the presenter. Whoever's taking the pictures should really think about trying to get behind the presenter and get a photo that shows the faces of the participants. Just a technique issue.
I agree. So, and there will be, make sure if your site is not registered with NYFOA at the Restore New York Woodlands, make sure that it is, and that and if maybe it is, and maybe you're working with the local NYFOA chapter and they're handling registration. You know, I think Tim had a comment earlier that he wasn't getting any mail, so we should make sure that, you know, that everybody that's affiliated with those woods walks is on the email distribution list, so that when, you know, materials are going out, you know, from now through the middle of May, that everybody sees everything that's available to them. So I think, Jerry, was there anything else?
I think we covered it.
Okay. Are there questions? The microphone option is actually working pretty well. If people want to click their own microphone icon or put a note in the chat pod, I believe people can activate their own microphone, but I don't know. That'll be easier than typing in long-winded questions. Kurt and Christy, no. Looks like Kurt and Christy were going to say something. Ron's going to say something.
Hi. Am I coming through?
Yes. Hi, Ron.
Hi.
Speak loudly.
Okay. Just a couple comments. One, I think excellent presentation, not to belabor that. Part of the quality of timber portion of Jerry's comment, I thought about the green lie, which undoubtedly you're going to bump into. and you see lots of trees around, because it's sometimes difficult to distinguish between the quality and the nut quality to a lot of people. And the other comment I would make is we need to be very careful to explain things in nuts and bolts language and not jargon language. It's awful easy to use terminology that we know, familiar with. It means nothing to other people.
Very good point. So for those of you that maybe didn't hear that well, Ron's two key points were that we need to be careful to make explanations happen without using jargon. So be really sensitive to thinking about that. And if there's any question, try to ask people if they, does everybody understand what a particular phrase means? We talked about here a shelterwood silvicultural system. We showed pictures of that. That's technical jargon that probably some of you all of you have maybe heard of it. Most of you are probably familiar enough with it to understand it, but maybe couldn't particularly explain it. So be sensitive to your audience. It worked for us because it illustrated good silviculture, but just think about using jargon. The other point, Ron's point in thinking about exploitative harvesting, is the notion of a green lie, and that is if there are trees on them hills, then everything's a-okay. So be alert to the fact that what you're telling them may not resonate with what they think your observations are. Try to anticipate that and work around it. All right. Any other questions or comments?
Quick question here from Charles Stackhouse. The last thing I'm going to have a little bit of a hard time explaining is why I planted so many deer food plots. We actually got that question asked us by Sitzel Overgaard, the reporter who interviewed us for the National Public Radio. And we like to hunt them, and we try to restore the number of deer for the carrying capacity, but it's a little hard to explain the food plot, and I'm dreading getting that question again.
Okay, so the question is about food plots. Let me turn on Gary's microphone. Gary.
Okay. I already hit my
oh, you've got a message there.
Comment to improve the shooting, or maybe the kill ratio or something like that. My standard line regarding food plots are a great way to see deer and have deer up close and personal all summer, which is all good. And then when hunting season comes along, having them up close and personal definitely improves the kill ratio. But the downside of food plots, I got nothing against food plots. If you're going to grow more deer, shoot more deer. You don't want food plots just so you can have more deer on the landscape, creating all the problems that deer create when there's too many deer. So that's kind of my line regarding food plots.
All right. I think sounds like a good response. It's they'll produce more deer, so you have to be prepared to shoot more deer. Then Jim Miller typed in a question: is it true that something will regenerate, although it is probably not what we would want? That's a great question. And you saw the picture that illustrated that was the fern fields, or the forest ferns picture that Jerry showed. Plants are going to regrow that are capable of enduring the pressures and stresses and taking advantage of the opportunities that exists within those pressures and opportunities. So if there is low light conditions and heavy deer browse, then only plants that are tolerant of shade and are not palatable to deer, or that are protected in some fashion, are going to be able to regenerate. So when we have conditions such as high grading, where we're just cherry picking the woods It creates low levels of sunlight that comes in. Most of our desirable species lack or require higher levels of sunlight, so that low level of sunlight favors what are typically non-desirable tree species and particularly favor invasive shrubs and undesirable trees such as American beech because of it's undesirable because of disease problems. So the answer is yes, very much so. And when you walk in the woods and you look in the understory, what you see in the understory is a reflection of the environmental conditions that have been present over the last 5 or 10 or 15 years. It has selected for plants that can reproduce in those environmental conditions. So having a diversity of plant species is important because it provides some resilience to the woods, and if you have an overstory that's eventually all sugar maple or all red oak or all black cherry, those are very valuable species, but if you get an insect infestation that's particular to that species, you could end up really taking it on the chin. So the diversity is helpful for wildlife as well as for economic objectives. All right. Any other questions or comments? All right, good question, Lou. Can smaller areas of beech be controlled by manual methods such as cutting, continuous cutting of suckers? The answer is yes. I guess it depends on what you mean by continuous. And so there's two pieces to that. One, so go back to the objective. Our objective is not just to kill American beech, or to control American beech, more correctly stated. The objective is to control American beech so that we can regenerate other species that add to the diversity of the forest. And that's one of those really teachable moments where you ask people to look into the overstory and say, what are the species that you see in the overstory? And you can show them. I know Lou here is in the central New York area, the Southern Tier chapter, and so he's might be looking at sugar maple and red maple and black cherry and red oak and basswood and white ash, and then you look in the understory and it's all American beech. And you ask the question, if we had an ice storm and the overstory was killed, what would the next forest be? And you look on the forest floor, and if it's all beech, the answer is your next forest is going to be beech, and if those beech are diseased, the next forest is going to be a monoculture of diseased stems. So the objective, I'm getting to the question, is the objective is we want to control the beech for a particular outcome. So that then gets to what does it take to be a continuous cutting of suckers. Dr. Nyland, the silviculturalist at the SUNY College of Environmental Science and Forestry, has done some research, and he found that if you have, so picture your forest as 2 tiers, and all of this is written up in the beech, Forest Connect beech fact sheet. So if you go to the forestconnect.info page and look at publications, you can get the beech fact sheet. But if you have a closed canopy above the beech, which means there's no sunlight coming through, he has had success using a brush saw to cut the suckers, and I think he's done just a single cutting of suckers in the shade, and he's able to regenerate shade-tolerant species he's able to establish shade-tolerant species such as sugar maple. So he controls the shade close to the ground. That increases the amount of sunlight close to the ground. The shade in the upper canopy reduces, but doesn't eliminate, reduces the suckering of beech following the brush saw cutting, and is synchronized with a good seed year for sugar maple, which happens every, 4 to 7 years maybe. So you have to line a lot of things up, and you still have to control the deer. in the absence of adequate sunlight, those sugar maple seedlings that become established are not going to grow very fast, and if you have a good deer herd, they're going to provide you with some of the seedlings, like the browsed sugar maple seedling that Jerry showed earlier. It's also, I guess I would ask people how much time do they have to cut beech suckers, and what trade-off are they willing to make between avoiding the use of some of these chemicals that are, all chemicals have some environmental risk, but these carry an EPA's least toxic rating for things like glyphosate in Roundup or Accord, or some of the other products that use the active ingredient glyphosate. So the trade-off is, you're going to use a chemical, but if you don't use a chemical, then you're going to potentially end up with a monoculture of diseased stems. And that also has some environmental risk associated with it. So it's a matter of where do you want to place your risk, and what's your comfort level with those. So the answer to that question, Lou, is yes, but it's probably a lot more effort than what most people are willing to do. And it aligns with some of the efforts where groups will have, I'll just say, weed pulling parties. Come and do a garlic mustard pull, or I've never seen any multiflora rose pulling parties, but I suppose you could have one. So it's just, yeah, it works, but it's an awful lot of effort. Sorry, that was a very long response to a fairly simple question. Okay, Jerry says, sorry I missed that. Something about stewardship management plans. Sorry, I have a cough. So if the property that's being visited has a stewardship management plan, there was probably was a forester involved, almost certainly was a forester involved at some time. The stewardship management plans or stewardship plans or forest management plans, they're all essentially the same thing, or 480A plan. All are guides to help landowners move their property from the condition of the current forest to the condition of the desired forest. And by doing that, it lays out, here are the starting conditions, here are the resources that are available, here's the objective that the owner has. So the owner has an objective for deer hunting and for timber production and for cross-country skiing, and how do we make the forest provide for all of those resources. I would say if the owner is willing to share, have available for viewing their stewardship management plan, that might be of interest to some people, particularly if there are members of the public and they're showing up, or other landowners, for them to know that there's a plan, right? This effort at being a woodlot owner is not a haphazard seat of the pants activity. Then that, I think, speaks highly for the credibility of woodland owners. So, but I think that we would also, I don't know, I won't speak for all of you. I know that if I look at my management plan, there are things that I should have done that I didn't do, and there are things that I have done that didn't make it to the plan, and that's because plans need to change to account for circumstances that we don't anticipate, and that's a reality of life. It's like, what do you plan to have for lunch, and maybe you have that for lunch, and maybe you don't. So I think Jerry mentioned that, to talk about the management plan and to make sure people know that there are deliberate efforts that go into managing these woodlands, and that it's a good thing and it helps us. DEC will provide that service. It varies from region to region how quickly that happens. I would say that it's generally to our advantage to encourage people to contact DEC ask them, they may need to be persistent and call and talk to somebody on the phone and, convey their earnest desire to be an active manager and to have a good plan. I think the DEC would respond to that. There may be some areas, maybe Jerry Michael can respond to this. I think there are some areas in the state where they've lost their service forester, and that service forester has not been replaced, and so there's essentially a gap in the coverage for some of those management plan options.
Yes, we lost our forester in Broome County. He retired about a year ago, and we currently get our DC coverage out of Portland, but they have a big backlog, and it'll take several months to get a DC forester to come to your property and help start that process. I think an alternative here, in some cases, is the use of the master forest owners. Frank Winkler and I are together going to do a joint master forest owner visit a week from Saturday to a 400-acre hunting club in Ulster County that are interested in 480A. And basically, they wanted to talk to people who actually have the plan on their own property and have experience with it before they even approach the DEC. So we're going to take a look at it and describe our own experience with the program and give them the literature about it and so forth. So I think that MFOs can be a stopgap here.
Very true. And MFOs would not be writing the management plans, but because they often cases will have their own management plans, can describe why that's a good resource and why it's worth pursuing. There are, if in situations where DEC is not, for whatever reason, is not able to provide that service, there are consulting foresters that can develop stewardship plans. I don't have any idea on prices. I would guess, it's probably on the order of, I'll say $3 to $6 per acre, depending upon the complexity of the property and the detail with which the landowner wants that plan. I'm pulling those numbers kind of out of thin air, but I would guess it's fairly close to that. And Jerry Michael mentioned the 488 plan. That's the forest tax law plan. Those are required to be written by consulting foresters or a private sector forester. The DEC will not write those plans. All right, I think am I missing any questions? So one of the we were talking about earlier, I just saw a note. We were talking earlier about some of the pushback that people are going to offer, and the pushback on the three big notions of the impacts of deer, the presence of interfering vegetation, and of exploitative harvesting. In the Woods Walk packet that we showed you, that's about a 25, I think we'll say 20 pages. On pages 8 to 10 of that packet, there are there's some narrative that address those the pushback that you're likely going to see. It'll be interesting to get feedback. We should do a debriefing with all of the host sites and see what kinds of questions and issues were raised by participants. But if you want, a start to look at some of those responses, go to pages 8 to 10 of that packet of material. Okay. Well, any other questions for Jerry or me or anybody? All of you, I think, have had your experiences with woods walks, so you can certainly chime in with experiences or other thoughts. Well, Jerry, glad you're here. Glad you're joining in then. I think you'll enjoy the experience. I just got a note from Jim Miner. You know, the notion of doing a debriefing is, I think, would be valuable. NYFOA has a really cool capacity to do a kind of a survey process directly within an email, so you don't have to go to some other web page to fill out a survey form. And the Restore New York Woodlands committee should think about the kinds of questions they want to ask hosts and chapter chairs, and if there's, you know, maybe that a host is assisted by a master forest owner volunteer or a DEC forester or their private consulting forester or whatever. All those people are going to have different perspectives, but that would be very powerful to carry this initiative forward in the future and streamline it for even greater successes. All right. Well, so Jerry, I think your comment here about, you know, looking for the deer damage, the way that you can share that experience with people that come into your woods and say, until whenever, a month ago or a week ago or 3 months ago, I didn't realize the extent of the problem in my woods. But look at, I mean, you can take them to the spot where you had your aha moment, and you can show them what you saw, and through that direct conveyance of your experiences, many of them will also have an aha moment. I was in our woodlot last week, and I knew that we had a few deer around, but I guess I didn't really think it was too much, and I went out off one corner of our camp, and we had some. I guess I'd seen it from a distance. I'd never really looked at it because it was so close, but it was kind of nice knee-high sugar maple seedlings, and I walked over there, and it caught my attention because the snow had melted. There was, you know, I saw the brown leaves, and I saw all these little white, looked like little white, you know, dots looking up at me from the ground. And when I'd been over and looked at it, every single sugar maple seedlings had been browsed off, every single one. So it was, and what I'm going to do, we're doing a woods walk on our property, is we're going to flag to get some little pieces of ribbon and tie little pieces of red ribbon around all of those freshly cut twigs and show them, you know, so people can, it'll draw their attention. It highlights the impacts of that. The other thing we're going to do is we have, many of you will be familiar with the timber contest. That's a component of the Restore New York Woodlands initiative. And I was installing, I'd put in a small growth plot on our property about 5 years ago, and I'd done some thinning, and it was interesting. Two species regenerated. We regenerated eastern hop hornbeam, and we regenerated eastern white pine. And all of the eastern hop hornbeam is now about waist high, because it grows better in partial shade than the eastern white pine does. But the eastern white pine had regenerated. It was all about ankle high, and all of those had also been browsed off. So there are lots of teachable moments that you can use, you know, the living laboratory of your woodlot to make good points. So Phil says, are Jerry Michael's photo of the deer exclosure available?
The answer is yes. In fact, I have some additional ones. By the way, that exclosure is on a property adjoining my hunting club's property in Delaware County. It's a large project. It's a 100-acre exposure, and it's been in place about 8 years now. But we can figure out, maybe we can just email that photo to everybody that's on tonight or anybody else is interested in it.
Is it worth I mean, there's got to be a way to post pictures so that anybody can go and grab them. I'm not sure the best way to do that.
I could just send it to Phil in an email, but
right, that might. But, all right, so Kelly just sent me a note. I wonder if we could post them either on the NYFOA web page or on the Facebook page. I bet if we posted them on Facebook, you could grab them from Facebook. They wouldn't necessarily. I bet they wouldn't be a high quality, high resolution picture though from Facebook. So. So maybe, Jerry, the thing to do is you could, yeah, Lou says the CornellForestConnect.ning site. How about we'll work on some options to try and find a convenient mechanism to distribute those, and then we'll send a note. We have all of your emails because you registered in for this webinar. We'll send a note to all of you as well as to all of the registered participants and let you know where you can grab those pictures. Good ideas. Jim Miner says there's no problem with putting them up on the website. So that'd be good. And if we can, I'm assuming we can download them from the website. So if that works, then maybe we just send them to Jim, and then we have a photos section that people can go to access those pictures from. Okay, good. So he says yes, they can be downloaded. All right. Okay, well, seeing no other comments, and we're pushing the 8:30 mark. As host and on behalf of the Restore New York Woodlands Committee, and particularly Jerry and Kelly, who've put a great deal of work into this, and all the others, Jim Miner's been doing wonders with the web page, keeping that up to work, and Sarah Stackhouse, lots of people very involved in this. So thank you all. I'll try and get this webinar recorded. Well, it's recorded now. I'll get it converted and up on YouTube, and it'll be accessible. You all don't need to see it again, but other people will be able to see it. Hopefully by tomorrow evening, I should be able to get that done. So thank you all very much. Have a great evening.
Thank you. Thank you, Peter.